Okay, so this YouTube is about, first of all, reading a file, and secondly, about reading and writing a file. And so the file um, that I create is this file, and you can do that incidentally in the Python editor. You just create it, type it in. Um, as you can see here, this is a file where you have last name, comma, first name, colon, grade, for students. I'm starting with Etienne Beauvais and going to John Zelli. Um, and these first two functions are simply going to read that file and print them out. And they do something slightly differently. So let me run both of them for you here. All right, so let me run this one first. And what I need to do is to supply the file name in quotes. It will not work if you do not put the quotes in. File to read is .text is the file that contains the last name, comma, first name, colon, grade. And if I do that, this first function, which takes the file name, first of all, opens the file of that name in read mode. That's what this R means. Provides a handle to the file. This is how you get to elements of the file. Prints out, first of all, leave new line at each line end, and then iterates through each line in the file, prints the whole line out, and then closes the file. And so you see in the printout here, you get an extra space between each of these lines, and the reason for that is at the end of each line here. So here's the source file. There, where the cursor is, there is actually an enter, which when I was typing the file and I put an enter in to get to the next line, and that's echoed when this is printed out. So if you didn't want the extra file line between the empty line between the lines, what you would do is you would execute this second one, and it proceeds pretty much the same way. It opens up the file, prints out an explanatory comment that it's going to print out. It's going to take out the new lines from each file, from each line end. As before, we iterate through the file using infile as the handle, line by line. And we use indices here. A line colon -1 prints everything except the last character. But since the last character is the new line, it suppresses the new line, and we get single spacing on the output print. And so to demonstrate that, I'll run the second function here. And you can see that it now prints out with no spaces between. Now, just to demonstrate that you need the quotes around this, if I took the quotes out, as I am doing now, and so instead of putting file to read.text between quotes giving a file name, if I do this, Python's going to complain because it's going to try and interpret file to read without quotes as a variable name, and it's telling you that that's undefined. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to use this third function here, average grades, which takes two inputs. It takes a file name as an input and a file. fn in is the input source file, and fn out is the output file that we want to create and write to. And what it's going to do is it's going to read the grades from this first file that I created, and it's going to write out one per line, each grade, and then the final entry in the file is going to be the average of the grades. And so what I do now is I open The source file, that's this one right here, file to read.txt. When I run it, I'll put that in for reading, and both opens the file and provides a handle, which we will which is in file, and then it opens fn out. Well, this is where I'm going to write each grade and then the average of all the grades. Provides a handle out file, and before cycling through the source file and doing any writing, I'm going to set up a counter, which is going to count the number of grades as I go through the file. I'm going to increment that, but I'm going to initialize it to 0, and I'm going to set up a sum accumulator because I want to get an average. And now what I do is I start cycling through the in file where the grades are, and then I do the same thing I did before. I find the oh, actually, this is new. I find the index in the source file for each line where colon occurs. So I find the index of colon in line, and then I take the portion of the string starting after the colon, going up to just before it ends, and so this -1 would truncate the new line character, and index +1 starts at the character after the colon. That's a temporary string, and then what I do is I take that temporary string and I do an else strip on it to strip out any leading white space on the left side, because if you look here, it looks like there might be some white space in there. Definitely is some white space. I'm not interested in that. I just want to start at the number. And then I do a print with file equal to out file. So out file is the handle for the file that we're going to be writing to. And here is the grade, which at this point is a string. So I'm going to write the string representing the grade to the file, out file. And then I take the float of the grade, because please remember grade is a string, and so if I'm going to do anything with numbers, I'm going to convert it to a float, best choice, and then add that into my sum accumulator, increase my counter by 1. So this is counting the number of grades, and this is accumulating a sum. So when I've gone through all the lines in my source file, when I've gone through this whole for loop here, I've gone through each line in my source file, and I have printed out to the output file, this new file that I'm creating, the grade 1 per line, and I've also accumulated a sum and counted the number of grades. And so when I'm finished with this loop, I compute the average as sum divided by counter, and I print out the last number in my output file, average comma file equals out file, and then I close both files. So let me go ahead and run this last one here so you can see what happens. So I'll just Control C and Control V that, and then this is going to be the input file name, which is file to read.txt, and this one we will call grades and average.txt. That's going to be the output file, which will be created. And so let me go ahead and run this. It's done. It doesn't tell you it doesn't show you explicitly that it did anything here, but now if I go over to the editor and I do an open and I look for all files of type extension.txt, there is the file that we just created, and here it is. Here are the first 4 grades. So it plucked the first 4 grades out of the file to read file, and then this now is the average. So look back through this code and make sure you understand all the steps. There's some different things going on in here, but it is, I think, a simple illustration of reading a file, reading from a file, creating and writing a file, and grabbing the inputs you need from the source file to, in this case, write out the grades and write out the average of the grades.